we have 5 times 5 equals 25. 4 times 6 equals 24. We see that multiplying the same number by itself gives you one number. When you make it one lower and one higher, multiply them together, you get one lower than the original product. Again, similarly, 8 times 8 equals 64. Similarly, 7 times 9 equals 63. Once again, multiply a number by itself, you get one number. Lower one, raise one, and you get a number that is one less. Memorize this, it will be on the test. Don't ask why, no explanation is needed. Alright, so now we are going to explain what happens when we multiply one number that is one less than a given number n and one number that is one greater than a given number n. So we see here that we are going to be multiplying two binomials by each other. We have n plus 1, which is one number greater than n, and n minus 1, which is one less than n. So by using the FOIL method, which I'm sure you have all learned by now, we can multiply these together and get n squared plus n minus 1. Because these two are additive inverses, we can cancel them out, and we are left with n squared minus 1, which is what we were originally trying to prove, that multiplying one greater than a number by one less than a number will give one less than their mutual product. Alright, so here we have a rectangle. This rectangle is 6 height and 8 length. One more than 7 by one less than 7. This same process will work no matter what size rectangle we use, as long as the height is one greater than a number and the length is one less than a number. All we do is we cut off one row and see what we have here. We are left with a 7 by 7 square with one square missing, thus demonstrating that, as in fact, a number one greater than a number times one less than a number is equal to the number squared minus 1. Alright, so you get 3 cookies, and 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 I get 3 cookies. We have 5 people, and they each have 3 cookies. Alright. Oh, but wait a minute. I'm giving a presentation. I can't have cookies. Okay. So you get 1 cookie, and you get 1 cookie, and you get 1 cookie. Uh-oh. Who else got cookies? Oh, I'm sorry. There's not enough for you. So now we have 4 people, and they each have 4 cookies, except there is 1 missing. Once again, 5 times 3 equals 4 times 4 minus 1. Multiply a number by itself, it'll be 1 more than multiplying 1 greater than 1 less. Just don't eat your cookies, because you're not allowed to during this college presentation. Alright, math is seen by our culture as something for specialists. Only a privileged few can really succeed at it. Well, the most anyone else can expect to do is just slide through the basics and then give up. But is competence in math something really only available to the genetically fortunate? Are most people doomed to live in fear of mathematics for their entire lives? My name is Jonathan Love, and I hope to expose this stereotype for what it really is, false, through my presentation of I Can't Do Math, Math Anxiety and its Roots in Early Education. Before I begin, I'd like to start with 2 disclaimers about this topic. First of all, it's a very complex and broad topic that hasn't been documented very well. It only got started to be researched about 40 years ago, and since then there hasn't been a lot of research on it until very recently. So, I will only be able to give an overall summary of the topic. And so in my presentation today, I'll be briefly talking about what math anxiety is, why it's a global issue, why it's important for something to be done about it, examining the roots of the problem, and then finally talking about what we can do to make a difference. The other disclaimer I'd like to make is that not only is it a very complex and broad topic, it is also a very personal topic. I'm sure that everyone here in this room at least knows someone with math anxiety if you do not have math anxiety yourself. So I'd like to clarify that most of what I say will be generalizations based on research centered around American public schools and may not be specifically applicable to the situation at CAJ. But keeping these in mind, there are still many lessons that can be learned. And so without further ado, let's begin. Simply put, math anxiety, sometimes known as mathophobia, is a fear of math. Like many psychological conditions, it exists on a continuum with a wide range of values it can take. On the one hand, you have people who are simply slightly frustrated by math. They may say they hate it, they would prefer to avoid it, it kind of confuses them. On the more extreme end, are students that go through physical shock when they're forced to go through situations that require them to use math. They may sweat, start shaking, or show other common panic attack symptoms when they're placed in a math test. Now, some of you may be wondering, does this really qualify as a global issue? I mean, yes, it's better if you don't have it, it's okay, it's good to be comfortable with math, but what impact does math anxiety have on the world? Well, the fact is that there are countless jobs that require an understanding of math, including accountants, architects, engineers, geologists, lawyers, politicians, research scientists, technicians, doctors, actuaries, managers, military personnel, agriculturists, chemists, biologists, meteorologists, statisticians, physicians, air traffic control analysts, economists, cryptologists, forensic scientists, designers, and, of course, math teachers. Math is applied in so many different fields. And quite simply, the fact is that a country with people who are good at math is a country with political and economic power. Not only this, but those who can use math comfortably are fulfilling God's purpose for them. Because math is an important part of understanding the way the world God made works and allows us to take responsibility for the world around us. See, God gives everyone various skills and abilities, and the purpose in having these abilities is so that we can use them to care for the world and for the people around us, and so that we can glorify God as we fulfill these responsibilities to others and to the world. Even in God's original perfect recreation, where the ground didn't have to be worked, because streams came up and watered the surface of the ground, and there was no evil to fight, humans still had a responsibility to rule the earth and take care of it. And fulfilling this responsibility, according to Proverbs 21:3, pleases God. And that's what glorifies Him. All the jobs I mentioned before are places where this can happen. By applying math to the situations they face, these people can fulfill their responsibilities, care for creation, and glorify God. But what we find is that many, many people cannot do this to the best of their ability. In fact, in a study of 885 university students, it was found that 60% faced math anxiety of some level. 60%, this is more than half. This is most people face math anxiety. And this study has been done in other situations too, in different countries, for example. India, China, those are the other main places I've been able to do my research. But math anxiety is incredibly common, incredibly pervasive all around the world. A direct result of this is that people avoid math majors. They avoid math-related jobs. And so many of the jobs that I mentioned above just can't be filled when there's so many people that just don't get math. Also, when math anxiety is so common, it causes other psychological problems and stereotypes to spread, and it directly influences culture. I'm sure you've all heard stereotypes such as girls can't do math, or math is only for the geniuses, or all these stereotypes that go all through our culture. Most of these are in fact false, and we're going to see why. Since math is so important to the world in so many different areas, the fact that so many people have math anxiety shows that this is not the way it was intended to be. In fact, math anxiety is a result of the fall of humankind. Let's look back at what happened in the fall. God had commanded Adam and Eve not to eat the fruit from the tree of good or evil, and when they did, they felt shame for the first time, their relationship with God was broken, and sin entered the world. But let's look at what happened. Even though Eve was the first to eat the forbidden fruit, it seems as though it was actually Adam who contradicted God's intentions for the first time. Why? We see that Adam was with Eve as she was being tempted, and did nothing to support her or remind her of her responsibility to follow God's law. He just let her flounder, not willing to support her or remind her of her responsibility. And later, he even blamed her for what went wrong. See, God had originally made Eve to be a helper for Adam, and Adam similarly supported Eve. When Adam failed to help Eve with her responsibilities, she stuttered, she panicked, and she gave in to the serpent's logic. People have since used their knowledge to tear others down rather than build them up. The focus on helping others grow was replaced by selfishness. Math anxiety, as we will see, comes from this problem. It comes when students don't get the support they need to take responsibility, because out of their own selfishness, people don't take the stand to help them develop their responsibilities in the areas of math. So if helping people with responsibility is something we need to be concerned about, then what should our role be in helping people develop responsibility? What can we do? After examining math anxiety and its significance to the world, it is clear that we must analyze the roots of the problem so we can see what must be done about it. And there are in fact biblical guidelines for the concrete solutions which we must follow in order to reduce the problem. Before we can do anything about math anxiety though, we must ask the question, where does it come from? What causes math anxiety? The first thing I would like to make very, very clear is that it's not about ability. It's true. Once you have math anxiety, it often does cause people's performance to drop. Because the students who have math anxiety, in their fear of math, will not have the motivation to drive themselves to succeed. They will lack the desire to go into the math and try and push themselves. But math anxiety does not directly come from being bad at math. In fact, it's not something that you're born with. While people are born with different mental capacities, almost everyone has the ability to be comfortable with math, at least to a basic level. According to a journal from the Journal of Developmental Education, research indicates that even students with proven math ability can experience anxiety to such a degree that impairs their short-term memory, making it difficult to perform mathematical tasks, debunking long-held myths that math anxiety is closely related to aptitude. To demonstrate this, here's a graph of math anxiety levels in 41 different countries, from a study by the Princeton Educational Testing Services. Now, if anyone here has math anxiety, don't freak out at this graph. I'll just try and point out the important information. Okay? Let's look at 3 countries that we are all very familiar with. Japan, Korea, and the USA. All countries that hopefully everyone knows about and can point them out on a globe. I don't know. I'm not covering geography, I'm covering math anxiety. But according to this study, Japan and Korea actually have far higher math anxiety levels than the USA. In fact, this line demonstrates the world average. So there are some countries such as Switzerland which are doing very well. But as we noted, USA has such a huge problem with math anxiety, with 60% of the university students studied having it. And yet compared to some of these other countries, it's really doing pretty well. We have countries such as Japan and Korea, and then even further up to Thailand and Tunisia, which are just, they must be like scared of their wits of math, I don't know. But here we have Japan and Korea, which have very high math anxiety levels. But the same study also gives a list of math performance based on standardized test score. And according to this mathematics country mean, Japan got a score of 534, Korea a score of 542, and the USA a score of 483. The world average, by the way, was 500. What do you think about that? Japan and Korea have much higher anxiety. They're more scared of math. They feel like they can't do it. And yet they perform far better on these standardized tests. It's very, very obvious that math anxiety and ability to do math are not directly linked. So where does math anxiety really come from? What are the roots of math anxiety? Math anxiety can almost always be traced back to one's elementary school education. Students who go into preschool feeling like a strong motivation and a lot of potential to do math may come out of elementary school feeling strong anxiety. But what happens after elementary school doesn't cause quite as much of an influence, unless it's very motivated, like a desire to get out of math anxiety. So we're going to look at elementary school. This is where my research focused on. And it turns out there are 2 main roots, social factors and teaching style. The 2 are actually very connected, as I will get into, but we will go into each one separately first. To begin with, I'd like to talk about girls. Why? Because gender differences are a very, very important part of what math anxiety comes from. I'd like to introduce to you something that I call the anxiety cycle. It basically demonstrates what happens in an average American public school classroom. To begin with, I'd like to begin with 2 facts, one which may not be so surprising and one which may be a little more surprising. First of all, almost all elementary school teachers are female, over 90% in fact. This may not surprise you. I'm sure that most of your elementary school teachers were female too. I only had one male teacher in elementary school. But the second, more surprising fact, perhaps, is that many, many elementary school teachers have math anxiety themselves. What does this lead to? Well, let's see here. So we have a teacher teaching an elementary school class, teaching both girls and boys. Now, the thing is, the teacher doesn't teach content, doesn't just teach books, especially at the elementary school level, but actually throughout school. The teacher teaches lifestyle, the teacher teaches attitude, and motivation, and worldview. Because the students look up to their teachers and see them as role models, as people that they want to follow. Whether they like the teacher or not, the teacher demonstrates what being an adult is like, and the students follow that. Especially girls. Girls are very sensitive to their female teachers. Boys, they're a little more clueless at that age, and perhaps throughout their whole lives, I don't know. But especially the girls pick up on their teacher's attitudes. And when a teacher has math anxiety, studies show that girls are very likely to get it as well. This promotes a common stereotype that some of you may have heard, I'm not sure, that girls are bad at math. Or another slightly nicer way of rephrasing it is, girls are good at reading while boys are good at math. And this stereotype that is so common in culture gets just pushed further by the fact that the teacher passes their anxiety onto the girls. So what happens in 10, 15 years as the students start thinking about their major or their career? Well, what happens is those that escape from math anxiety and are actually comfortable with math, they go into some of the jobs that I mentioned before, such as engineering, accounting, but mostly well-paying, prestigious jobs, since they have the ability to do math. And they try and get into these higher level professions. What's left? You have these girls who, they're good at reading, they're good at writing, they like working with kids, and they say, I am motivated to be an elementary school teacher. So they become a teacher, carrying their math anxiety with them, and giving math anxiety to a whole new generation of girls. Other social factors besides gender differences are minority groups. Often, if there is someone with an ethnic minority in a classroom, this person is not going to have the support of the same type that the rest of the class is going to have. And studies show that minority groups often don't succeed as well as majority groups in escaping math anxiety. And I'll be explaining why this happens later on. Financial or family background is also a very key factor. People from low-income homes or broken homes don't have the parental support to encourage them, to motivate them to try and do math for themselves. And also, related for those of you who were at Jacob's presentation, financial background could also determine the type of school that people go to, and low-income schools often end up with very ineffective teachers, teaching styles being something that I will get to shortly. Another surprising one may be language difficulties. Turns out that math is used in so much of what we teach and what we learn about math, not just in the word problems that I'm sure you're all familiar with. A farmer has 3 chickens. Each chicken lays 5 eggs. How many eggs are left? No, but even in just the introduction of concept, in adding, sum, difference, quotient, multiply, greater than, less than, and all these things, language is used. And people with a language disability, or someone learning math in a different language, like an ESL student, they actually have to overcome 2 barriers. They first have to get what the teacher's even saying before they can get the math concept. And this doubles the difficulty and makes it very difficult for these people to learn math. Let's move on to teaching style. What are some things that teachers do, aside from just passing their math anxiety on to students through their attitude, that can cause students to have math anxiety? One thing, which is very, very key, is an emphasis on rote memorization and rules and a symbolic focus. Math is taught almost as a foreign language, with countless random symbols that somehow give you the right answer if you arrange them right. Rather than a conceptual understanding of what's actually going on, students are just taught the rules for moving the symbols around. The emphasis on rote memorization and symbolic manipulation was what I was trying to illustrate at the beginning of my presentation. The fact is that any mathematical concept can be interpreted in many different ways, visually, kinesthetically, linguistically, not just symbolically. But so often teachers only focus on the formula, the symbols, the memorizing, rather than what it actually means, what it actually looks like. Many other subjects have been reformed to reflect the fact that the elementary mind just isn't wired to handling large amounts of memorization. Take history, for example, which a century ago was all about memorizing names and places and dates and events, but now it's more about why something happened, critical analysis, analyzing the situation. What would I have done in that situation? How does this affect us today? Or English, which used to be all about vocabulary and grammar, and now is about, while these are still included, has incorporated much more creativity, reading, writing, analyzing. Math still has a way to go when you end up in a situation where the teacher is just teaching rules to memorize. However, this isn't always the teacher's fault. One problem is speed. The fact is that every student, while most do have the ability to comprehend the math, they all do have different paces of learning. But the fact is that most curricula, especially at an elementary school level, go through the material way too fast for all but the fastest students to really fully understand what's going on. They cover concept after concept after concept, trying to cover as much as they can so that at the end of the year, the students will be able to take a standardized test and show what they know. Because they're going so fast, there's no time for the teacher to explain what's going on before they have to introduce the next concept to get through everything they need to get through. And so the students do okay, but only on the standardized test, not on the understanding of the material. This is what happened, for example, in the case of Japan and Korea in the graph I showed earlier. Their curriculum strongly emphasized rote memorization so they can cover as much as they can. As a result, they perform very well in standardized tests because they know how to manipulate the symbols, but they don't really understand what they're doing. And this causes math anxiety because it's mechanical, unnatural. Now, sometimes the teachers just aren't able to present the material in a very clear way. But often, and this is a fairly scary one to me, I don't think this problem affects schools such as CAJ so much, where the teachers are all fairly well trained. But especially in public schools in America, where the teachers don't get quite the proper training, there's often a large lack of teacher knowledge. Even teachers that go through 4 years of college education may come out with some strong misconceptions about mathematics. One rather scary study was conducted of 10 elementary education managers, in which they were asked what would happen when you divide by 0. The answer is that dividing by 0 is undefined. This is actually a pretty difficult question to answer well, especially at an elementary school level, but this is something that elementary teachers must be prepared to answer in case one of their students is curious and is wondering what's going on. So in this study, one teacher gave the correct answer, that dividing by 0 is undefined, and gave a good explanation for it. 2 gave the correct answer and said, oh, that's just the rule, you need to memorize it. Didn't really give an explanation. 5 said that anything divided by 0 is 0. And 2 said that they didn't know. This scares me a lot. Here's a quote, for those of you who can read it, of one of the people who said that the answer was anything divided by 0 is 0. And if you read this, you realize just how much confusion there is in the teacher's own mind. Like, you know, starting by talking about anything divided by 0 is 0, and then suddenly getting the question even wrong, saying anything multiplied by 0 is 0, starts bringing C sounds like K sometimes, or sometimes it sounds like S, and bringing I before E except after C. Just starts presenting it as rules that need to be memorized. If half of the teachers interviewed gave the wrong answer, and only one could explain what's actually going on, how would you expect their students to be comfortable with math if the teachers can't? Examining all these factors, the overall cause of math anxiety appears to be a lack of conceptual ownership. When students are taught rules instead of concepts, as things to be memorized without an in-depth explanation, they don't really understand it. They must have a big picture understanding of what's actually going on, how something works, before they can get into the details, the rules. Otherwise, it will always feel fake and insecure, more magical than logical. So what can we do about it? The fact is that if the fall were the end of the story, the situation would be pretty hopeless. People's selfishness would take them away from any chance to help others with math, or with their responsibilities towards God's creation. But seeing the problem, God provided a solution: the sacrifice of His Son, Jesus Christ. Christ's death on the cross was an act of redemption which freed us from the hold of sin, giving us the ability to speak truth, encourage others, and help others grow. Christ died so that we might bear fruit for God, which is our original purpose, to fulfill our responsibilities so we can improve our world and glorify God. Through Christ's sacrifice, we now have the opportunity to follow God's plan for the restoration of the world in helping others develop responsibility through a relationship with Him. We have the opportunity to work with God in helping decrease the problem of math anxiety, helping people gain confidence in math. So there are many things that can be done to decrease the problem of math anxiety. What are some important things to keep in mind? 2 guidelines that I came up with. First of all, a solution must be founded in love for the students. Compassion over completion. If your goal in a solution is to make better standardized test scores, then you're just going to teach the rules. If your goal is to just make sure the students don't get any math anxiety whatsoever because you want to be known as a teacher that doesn't let your students have math anxiety, then you're not going to teach the students any math because, that way they won't be anxious about anything. So, this is very important. Compassion for the kids, doing what's best for them, making sure they understand the math well, is very important, more than just completing a set of requirements. Another guideline is that confidence must be emphasized over content. Again, as mentioned before in speed, if so much is covered in a short amount of time, the students aren't comfortable with any of it, and they're going to struggle through their entire academic lives until they can reach the point where they say, I'm done with math, I'm out of here. If you inspire confidence in the kids, however, they will want to learn more. They will want to keep pushing themselves. So even if you only teach a few simple subjects, if they master those, it'll be a foundation from which they can quickly make up the missing material and even surpass their peers who have been forced to learn content over competence. So there are many concrete acts which can decrease the prevalence of math anxiety. I'm just going to quickly go through the large-scale solutions because these don't really affect you so much unless any of you are going to go write elementary or college curricula or anything. But I'd be happy to expand on these later for anyone who's interested. First of all, the curricula itself can be changed. Two possible options are an exploration-based curriculum and a microstep-based curriculum. Exploration-based curriculum is a curriculum in which there's a lot more activities, a lot more challenging problems that force the students to think. And when they can master these problems, it gives them the confidence to know that they were able to accomplish something. This allows reflexive growth. Students can reflect back on what they did and learn from that and gain conceptual ownership of what they have learned. The microstep-based approach is also very successful. It takes a slightly different approach, teaching concepts from the ground up in very, very, very small microsteps. Teachers are often surprised that what they thought was one step can actually be split up into 6 or 7 microsteps. This ensures that every student knows what is happening at every single step. And if there's any problems, the teachers know exactly what the problem is and can fix it. Both of these, especially the microstep-based method, in fact, encourage conceptual ownership. They encourage each student to know what's going on, and they're very successful at increasing student confidence in themselves in math. Teacher development is also very important. To decrease anxiety, one thing that has been suggested is peer-to-peer discussion, especially online, like Moodle. As teachers can discuss math anxiety, it's been shown that after just a semester of discussing online math anxiety, their levels of math anxiety significantly drop, decreasing the chances that they would pass it on to their students. But also, teacher knowledge is an important thing. So refocused training is essential to ensure that math teachers learn the stuff that they need to know. Often, many colleges just teach the math teachers more advanced math topics rather than reinforcing the foundational concept to make sure that they know what happens when you divide by 0 or why dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by its flipped version. Another one is raising the prestige of elementary math. As mentioned before, many people, if they're good at math at all, they go into jobs like engineering, which pay lots of good money, and also give a lot of career stability. Now, at the same time, it is selfishness that caused the fall. But even in the solution, we have to ensure that people have the career stability to be able to keep working. And so, raising the prestige of the elementary profession doesn't just encourage people's selfishness, it encourages that the people who go into the profession will have some security in their career. Things like increasing the salary to encourage more people to come and to make it more competitive, or to encourage publication, because in math circles, published works are basically your resume. The more you publish, the more likely you are to get into other jobs. So these are things that would encourage people to join this profession. But now let's look at solutions that affect you and teachers, more local solutions. First of all, whether you're a teacher or a tutor or just trying to work through math anxiety on your own, special activities are actually very, very helpful. First of all, literacy-based activities. As mentioned before, language difficulties can cause major problems. And a study by the Portland State University found that students with language difficulties can actually improve their confidence in math through vocabulary-based activities, so they understand the language of math as well as the concepts. Exploration-based activities, as discussed before in the curriculum section, allow students to take ownership of the material because they know that they solved the problem with the knowledge that they have. Finally, technology. There's some mathematicians, namely the most prominent is a mathematician named Wolfram Conrad, who encourages that all classes heavily use computers as learning tools and completely get rid of rote memorization. Most people don't really agree with this, but they do agree that technology can be very helpful in learning. For example, there's something called the Wolfram Demonstrations Project online, which is full of thousands of demonstrations of mathematical concepts. I encourage some of you to go and try it out. Look up pretty much any mathematical concept, and there's likely a demonstration there that you can fiddle around with until you can see what's actually going on and get past the symbols. Special programs are also very effective solutions that you can take part in. Things such as contests, camps, or websites. for example, two that I got involved in were the Canada-USA Math Camp and the Art of Problem Solving website. These were both very good for me and encouraged me to keep pushing in math because it gave me a community of people I could interact with. However, probably the most important solution is role models. Perhaps even more important than curriculum, in fact. There's a quote from Edward Gish in an article about Christian education that says, "The Bible does not teach what method to use, but it does teach what character to build." Why do girls have problems? Because their only role models are ones with math anxiety, so they think they should get math anxiety. Let's get back to minority groups. Why do people in minority groups have more struggles with math? Because they don't have anyone that they can look up to and see succeeding. They think that they are alone, and they think, oh, maybe my type of person can't do it as well as that type of person can. They need role models that will help support them. This is why broken families and low-income families also have such struggles, because the parents aren't there to support them and give them the support they need to truly be comfortable with the math. So there's all sorts of places you can find role models. Even in the media, you could watch In Beautiful Mind, or even fictional characters like in the TV show Numbers. These can help students realize that math is more than just filling out problems, but it actually applies to the real world and can help people succeed. Find ones especially for you. Minority groups, find one in your minority group. Girls, look up women like Emmy Nether or Esther Sekeres, who happen to have a very romantic math life, by the way. I'll tell you about it later if you're interested. Or find ones who are close to home. Ask your parents if they know any mathematicians or people who use math in their daily lives, because role models are so important. My attempt to add a solution to this problem was to be a role model myself. My project was to go to the 6th grade class and teach 2 classes, one about ratios and one about math anxiety. But really, more than the stuff that I talked about was the fact that I was there, giving myself I definitely would say that I'm not the best person to emulate in some ways, but the fact that I was comfortable with math and wanted to keep pursuing it, was excited about it, I hope that by doing that I could be a role model for them to get more of them to realize that they can get out of their math anxiety. We live in an exciting time for math education, actually. For the first time in decades, professional mathematicians and educational specialists are beginning to work together, while they used to be almost rivals, to figure out what the best type of education for students will be. This is what God wants to see happen. It's not that God wants every student to become a mathematician. Far from it. Every student will have different skills and abilities that God will use in them. But God does want to help us see young students in their journey through math, so that they will be able to better care for creation, and so they will be able to glorify God through their responsibilities in learning math. All of you can make a difference. Even if you currently have math anxiety yourself, whether you're a teacher or not, whether you're a parent or not, whether you're an older sibling or not, you can be someone who keeps trying anyways. You can be someone who supports and encourages the people in their journey to do math, because they need to know that they can do math. And so can you. Thank you for listening. Do you have any questions?
In your research, have you come across any programs or curriculum that focus on this math anxiety or overcome or cope with math anxiety students?
I found many curricula that refer to the problem, none that are specifically like, this program is made to overcome math anxiety. But there's one program in particular called the JUMP program, which uses the microstep-based method as I showed before. And surprisingly, it doesn't require trained teachers to teach the material. It's a set of workbooks that teaches step-by-step the materials, and it's had a very high success rate. In fact, in one study, for example, a group of 5th graders who had average in the class was 55th percentile went through a year of this program, and at the end of the year they took another standardized test and ended up at the 98th percentile. Incredible results. And so this JUMP program, I think, is one that specifically uses a firm foundational understanding to ensure that students do overcome math anxiety and know that they can do the math themselves.
Nice job, Jonathan. I'm really impressed. Janet, you tell us, have you looked at CAJ's math program, math education at all? Have you Chicago Math? To what extent do they focus on the exploration and the technology? Did you look at that at all?
Yeah, I have looked at that. Not very in-depth, however. One thing I have noticed is that, especially as I was going through my, this was mostly in middle school, and I didn't focus so much on secondary education, But I've noticed that a lot of the textbooks have, at the beginning of each chapter, an exploration section. But usually because there's so much content to cover, the teachers don't really get into that. And I'm not sure what the solution to that would be, whether to try and force more into the year by using the exploration section, or whether to try and teach less in 1 year. I'm not sure what the solution is, but I think those explorations that the curriculum does have, but just aren't being used in the math classes very much, would be very effective.
I think you hit on an important point, the time challenge. There's, you know, a lot of other things that have to be taught.
Yeah, so I'm interested in the issue of pace that you mentioned. The rote memorization is used as a way of making sure that enough content can be covered to do well in these standardized tests, or presumably the rationale would be to prepare the students who can keep up with that to excel in math-related careers. So would a slower pace that would, so I guess two questions. One, would your recommendations require a slower pace? And two, if so, how would you convince administrators or school officials who say, we can't afford to slow down. We need to get people prepared so that by the time they're 22 years old, you know, they are ready to be engineers.
So I'm not sure how it, I'll split the question up into two for now. First of all, would a pace required to be necessary? I'm not actually sure if a slower pace is necessary, but it does have very, very significant results. For example, this study that I showed before, one of the results mentioned is if you look across here, we have China right here, below the world average of math anxiety, which is odd since it's so close to Japan and Korea. You wonder if maybe they would be similar in some way. But the interesting thing about China is that even though it does encourage rote memorization, it covers much less material in a year than an American curriculum does. And so even though it is rote memorization that they encourage, they spend large amounts of time on just a few concepts. So I suppose that would help them to process the ideas more and perhaps figure out what's going on. And also in the scores that I mentioned, where USA was 483, 534, and 542, China actually had the highest score of all 41 countries studied. So not only does it have the lowest anxiety out of these 4 countries at least, it also has the highest scores. So a slower pace does actually make significant differences. I'm not actually sure whether a slower pace would be necessary. I haven't looked into that very much. Your other question was, how would you convince people that a slower pace would be necessary?
Well, if it's not necessary, then it's...
Okay, so yeah, I'm not sure then.
Jonathan is looking at that slide about Japan and Korea and what you shared about their anxiety level is high and yet the performance was well. Is there any argument that anxiety helps with the performance? I don't know if you understand what I'm asking. The pressure to succeed, or I don't know if it's parent pressure, peer pressure, but does that pressure, did you see any correlation? Is it just in those 2 countries? What?
Well, I think I know what you're saying. I didn't look too much at the other countries, but there is the impression that since there's the pressure to learn math, to learn it and understand and be able to perform well, rather than to actually own it conceptually, because there is that, supposedly that allows countries like Japan and Korea to go into the workplace and carry their skills with them, because they have that extra pressure on them. I think in some ways, though, this comes back to, it is very cultural, and I would hesitate about talking about their culture in particular and like encouraging them to change their culture. But in many ways, the encouraged to work based on pressure, rather than the encouraged to work based on what you feel that you can do to fulfill God's purpose in you, it really does come down to that, because in a way, they do become machines in a way, because they don't find any fulfillment in what they do, because all the way through, they're being pressured to do it, not because they love it, but because that's just what they've been taught to do, and their parents have been forcing them to do it, and that's all they know. It would be my impression of the situation, I guess. So it does help them perhaps do better in industry, but that is only because they are working based on pressure and will die out of fatigue much faster, and probably not be able to succeed as much in other areas such as family life or social life when they're so heavily strained to work in something that uses so much pressure.
So are you going to tell us about the romantic math life, or is that a long story?
Oh, okay. It's actually not that romantic. I just wanted to give you all a laugh in the middle of my presentation, because I'm sorry it wasn't kind of long. But basically, this Esther, I forget what her maiden name was at the time, and a guy named Paul Cherkes, I don't know how to pronounce it actually, I should have researched that. But the two of them began working on a math problem, which I could introduce to you if you're interested. Nah, never mind. Come talk to me later. But basically, they started working on this math problem, along with this other very famous mathematician called Paul Erdős. And the three of them were working on this problem, but Erdős had a lot of other problems to work on because he was like very known and very well worked on. So mostly it was the two of these people working together. And basically, the problem itself was never solved, but the two of them ended up getting married. So now the problem is often called the happy ending problem, called that by Paul Erdős because he was so happy that the two got married. So even mathematicians can have romance. Don't worry. Any other questions?
Last one, do you watch Numbers?
No.
Okay.
I wish I did though, in some ways. Any others?
Thank you very much.